Okay, I can jump in happily. Well, I'm just very happy to have Naomi here. I've been an admirer of her for like many years with Bill McKibben. They've done a lot of great work. But getting to the energy transition, I guess now, I mean, we basically, if we're gonna move to low carbon economies, we have to rethink how the economic system, and that's something that Naomi has been thinking a lot about and writing a lot about. And basically, I mean, in recent times, most of the sustainability plans that have been proposed, such as the Green New Deal and others, whether here in the United States or in Europe, they have been about maintaining kind of like the same system. They're trying to like work with the same system that we've been having for so many decades. But the problem is that by trying to decouple the system with economic growth from resources, that is just not going to be possible or feasible maybe in the time that we need it to. Like we have 10 years, however long. But so many ecological economists believe that not being straightforward with people about the need to change our consumption patterns and adapt our expectations to low carbon future results in greenwashing sustainability transition. So Naomi, you have been writing a lot about social and environmental dangers of unfettered capitalism. Can you talk a little about institutions, countries, or regions of the planet that you think give us hope and that we can learn from to achieve the systemic change that is needed to advance real as opposed to greenwash sustainability?
I wish there were more places that we could point to. At a national level, I think it's tricky. But first I would just say that I think that degrowth is a helpful framework in academia. I think it's a helpful framework for research that we need to reckon with. As kind of outward-facing movement messaging, I've always argued that degrowth is not a particularly helpful frame. For the reasons that Loretta was just talking about, that so much of the world is living with not enough, and that a lot of what we need to be defining is what makes a good life as well, even for over consumers, right? And so a lot of what people just hear when they hear degrowth is just my life is going to be worse, right? As opposed to my life is going to be different. We're going to be valuing different things. And people who do not have enough are going to have more, right? Which is what I think the reason why we talk about climate justice, right? Which includes within it redistribution, right? It includes within it core principles of justice, which is that the people who created the crisis pay the biggest burden, pay the biggest cost, and the people who have bearing the brunt of the impacts of the crisis and did the least to produce it have some kind of reparation for that, right? And that takes the form of transfers of resources and wealth, including the capacity to leapfrog over fossil fuels, sharing green technology, open sourcing intellectual property, things like that. And it's been, I think, a shame that a lot of the ways in which we've talked about a Green New Deal in the United States have appropriated this discourse, which comes from the global South. Like I first heard about this from organizers in Ecuador who were putting forward the plan to save the Yasuni, African organizers in the Niger Delta who were asking for reparations for the destruction of their lands and waters. And these ideas, as they moved north, then kind of came into the America First frame, and we end up with presidential candidates talking about a Green New Deal and greening the military and beating China, in the race, for green tech and things like that. That's not what climate justice is, right? So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do in order to define and reclaim. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers this at all, what you are getting at, Rigo, but maybe ask me again if what I'm not answering.
I think it was great to, I mean, I didn't know many of those things, how the discourse was coming from the global south that has been adopted here in North America. But I mean, talking about redistribution, right? You have been heavily involved in the fossil fuel divestment movement.
Yeah.
And it has been pretty successful. I mean, last time I checked, there were like, I think 12 or $15 trillion that have been divested from around the world. So do you think that the fossil fuel divestment movement that you've been a part of has the potential to enable the systemic change that we need for the sustainability transition? Like, our current financial system basically transfers interest payments to the private sector, which is akin to a tax on investment. How do we finance this transition without transferring more wealth to the financial sector?
Well, I think we need public financing. I think we need public banks. I think waiting for the private sector to fix this for us and to just have the right financial incentives in place is a recipe for disaster and a recipe for very damaging forms of green extractivism, of so-called green extractivism. Because yes, I have been part of the fossil fuel divestment movement, and this is something that Bill McKibben and I kind of kicked off together. Although I didn't go on tour because I had a newborn, but we sort of understood when we looked at that original research about stranded assets, right, and the fact that if governments were to do what scientists were telling them they needed to do, we would have many trillions of dollars worth of stranded fossil fuel assets. And that just wasn't going to happen without political pressure, right? And that was why companies like Shell and Chevron were reassuring their shareholders after the Paris Agreement was negotiated, don't worry, it's non-binding. We're not going to actually have to do this, right? And so the fossil fuel divestment movement is about creating a kind of a market crisis. But to me, it was never just about letting the market solve this. It was really about a political strategy to render these companies toxic in and of themselves, because, every time you and other students have been out there making the argument for why your universities should not be invested in fossil fuels, you're making an argument that these are immoral companies, that they that they're not just any other investment. That they're investments at war with the possibility of a safe future. Now, that same argument is starting to trickle up into the way the Sunrise Movement is pushing politicians not to take fossil fuel money. And it's also starting to trickle up to pressure on television stations not to run fossil fuel advertisements, and newspapers not to produce fossil fuel advertisements, because they actually make the ads for them. They make advertorials for them. And that is where we really reduce the political power of the fossil fuel sector. I don't think this is just going to be a market solution. I think that we made a kind of a market argument that really is about creating the political space for us to regulate fossil fuels, if that makes sense. And to break apart some of the dependencies between our media and our politicians and the fossil fuel sector.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I was just going to ask you one more question quickly about, I believe that one of the main problems that we have as a society in North America and elsewhere around the world, especially in highly countries that consume a lot of resources, is that to achieve real sustainability, we need to have get people to understand what energy actually is and how we are completely dependent on it. I feel like a lot of people just turn on the switch or like get on their cars and drive. Nobody really gets to think about it or understand where everything comes. It's like when you go to the supermarket, same thing. Most of your food, you don't know where it comes from. So this lack of understanding of the nature of energy has fed into a dualism and disconnection that exists between humans and the rest of nature. And that is driving all of this unsustainability problems. So what do you think is the role of academia in reducing this disconnection when most of the curriculum at all levels of higher education has been developed during the fossil fuel era of abundance that ignores our complete dependence on the environment for our survival, and mostly teaches people how to exploit natural resources faster than understanding their finite nature and the need for us to be resourceful to create more intelligent and long-lasting civilization.
I like the use of the word resourceful there. And I think it is a challenge for post-secondary, but I would also argue, and maybe that it's even more of a challenge for pre-secondary. I think part of what we suffer from is this idea of a kind of a common curriculum for K to 12, which renders the world generic, right? When actually what we should be learning, what our kids should be learning from a very young age, is the specifics of their own ecosystem. One of the hopes that I had during the pandemic was that, because outdoor education is safer in the context of COVID, that we would rise to the challenge of getting kids outside more, getting kids in nature more, and really learning about where they live, and not just, the kinds of trees in their area, but also where our energy comes from, where our garbage goes to. I think kids should be going on field trips to garbage dumps and recycling depots, and really learning at a very, very young age. And I think that that we can play a role in post-secondary in helping design really exciting curricula for middle school and high school teachers to really start this at a very young age, because kind of by the time that you get to university, your worldview is a little bit locked in when it comes to the relationship with the natural world. I mean, we can push beyond it, but yeah, I'm in favor of starting early.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I was also trying to get at the higher education situation, which, the reason why in the past 40 years we got neoliberalism established in the United States and then exported to like the rest of the world, was because there was this heavy investment in economic departments specifically by people who were behind, liberalizing everything and making sure everything was privatized, and to basically transfer as much wealth as we could to the wealthiest. And if we, for example, wanted to have more ecological economists as opposed to neoliberal economists, we would need to get people behind that and invest in professors, in graduate students. So that's kind of like, I was just trying to, if you
I love that. Yeah, that's great. It'd be like the Vermont school as an antidote to the Chicago school. Yeah. Maybe it shouldn't be in the United States at all, given the track record. But no, I mean, as you know, I spent a lot of time studying the huge impact of this actually relatively small program at the University of Chicago, that moved hundreds of Latin American economic students, and also franchised it to different economics departments in Chile and Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. But it's kind of amazing the bang for the buck that the State Department and the Ford Foundation got out of that decision to indoctrinate a generation of economic students in this extreme free market ideology. I'm not sure I love this sort of franchise model, but I do think that we, as ecological thinkers, we know that centralization is part of the problem, and that we need specificity as much as possible. So the problem, we can't replicate their methods because we don't believe one size fits all. If you believe, as Larry Summers said, and I quoted him in the shock doctrine, the same rules work everywhere. Spread the word, spread the doctrine. If we believe that the same rules worked everywhere, it would be much easier to be an ecological economist. But I think there are core principles that we do need to proliferate.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Constanza, who I know has many good questions to ask you.
Thank you.
Hi, Naomi. Thank you, Rigo.